This episode was originally a live webinar hosted back in May 2024.
At Holy Code, I would say we were rather lucky that we started using the service for ourselves. We needed to build a software team for our own company, solving our own problem. And then there were just a lot of other startup founders in the same sort of range that came to us and said, hey, this is something we could also profit from. So it was relatively clear to us that this works because we solved it for ourselves and we found enough other people that also had that same issue.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Silvan.
Hello, happy Tuesday, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in and for joining this live stream / webinar. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. We have two very special guests and former Swisspreneur podcast guests live here joining us for this live stream. The first one is Laurent on the top right. He's the co-founder at Holy Code, a software company providing nearshoring services mainly for startups, but also for some bigger clients. Good to have you here, Laurent. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
And on the top left, we have Boris, the founder of Growth Unlimited, where you help startups to navigate to product market fit. You have built multiple very successful companies yourself. If people want to listen to the whole story, I recommend to tune into your podcast episode that we did. And also a big thank you to you, Boris, for being here and sharing your expertise.
Thanks to you, Silvan. Thanks for having me again.
So to start things and to warm things up a bit, I want to start with you, Boris. We heard you help startups, you help entrepreneurs achieve product market fit, but for many years, you were the one in the startup trenches yourself. What actually made you want to take a step back and become more of a teacher figure than an operational founder yourself?
I guess I already told you last time, my father's a teacher, so it's probably my genes. No kidding. I started basically, once I have time after my last gig, I started to reflecting on my career. What I realized is that the topic product market fit was always very important, and I missed it a couple of times as well. I mean, in would say even in different phases of startups, because there's always, again, product market fit if you launch something new, right? I started to kind of create a structured approach to product market fit for myself at the beginning. And in that time, I got some offers to join other startups, and I declined because I was working, or I wanted to get a new idea, right? I want to start my own business again. But I told them, like, we can work together, I can be an advisor or work part-time on something. And I guess during that time, I realized that I really like working like that. I would say it's probably due to my age as well, right? I don't know if I really have enough energy to start now something new from scratch. Probably it's the age, probably it's just a current phase or whatever. I'm not saying that I'm not going to start something again, but I just found that it's really kind of convenient for me, and I really like the work. It's passionate about helping others as well. The other thing is that when I'm now working as an advisor or a mentor with those startups, and I see how they need to hustle, I see how they need to work. I'm really happy to be just on their side and supporting them basically.
So many things coming together that led you to that change, basically. And if we switch over to you, Laurent, just to warm you up as well, you're operationally very active at Holy Code. I think we see you everywhere at all the startup events, online, very present. You're also an investor yourself in several very well-known Swiss startups. And I just wonder, what is sort of the vision for Holy Code's future? Because you also started to acquire other companies. So where do you want to take this?
So the main goal behind Holy Code is currently really that from the idea of a company up until the IPO of a company, we can solve all the technological challenges that the company faces, right? So that means wide variety of skills that you need to be able to cover for your clients. So it's not only staffing the right teams, but it's also building the right MVPs or finding the right hosting and DevOps solutions and the right ERP system and many, many, many more topics like that. And we can cover a lot of that already with the 400 employees that we have. But one of the reasons we started looking at acquiring or adding additional companies is, there's so many new things coming up. Is whether it's AI, then there's a lot of technological changes in the different verticals that you need to be on top of. So we're trying to add very specific know-how on these different areas to keep growing and to really serve the startups. I mean, the main mission is make sure that not 90% of tech startups fail, but actually more than 50% are successful. That's our goal.
I love it. And I feel we have invited the exact two right people to talk about the core topic today. Have you done your homework on product market fit? That's the big question that we want to answer together. And I want to start with you on this one, Boris. You've gone through that multiple times yourself. And if you want to know if a product actually fits the market, we usually start with thinking about what is the market, who actually buys from me, and then sooner or later we come up with the ideal customer profile. How do we actually really properly define and then also test this ideal customer profile? Can you talk a bit more about that? Because that's probably the starting point.
It's good when it's a starting point, because I often wonder that lots of startups cannot answer this question, what the market actually is, even if they're already on more advanced stage, even if they already have a product. So I think it's extremely crucial. Obviously, at the beginning, it's based on assumptions, right? You have all those options. You can be B2C, B2B. It's extremely important, or as well difficult, to decide on what to focus first, right? And it's really about focus, because you're a small team. You cannot do every different markets at once. But at the beginning, you need to make this decision. Who's your first market? Usually more a niche, smaller market, right? Called a beachhead market as well. I see lots of teams struggling with that questions, right? Because obviously, probably you get, this very shiny, great customer if you do this, but you actually have decided to do this. And so these are the hard decisions as a founder. How to basically test that? Well, I think, when you start with this more niche market, right, it's easier to see whether you get traction or not, right? Because the customers are pretty similar and they have similar needs as well, right? So it's easier as well to develop your product further. Then you can still, grow it to a bigger market once you have basically conquered a smaller market, right? Before that, even before you enter in a market, it's super important to have certain evidence that this is the right market. It's really the most attractive one. And here, you tools are basically interviews, right? This is as well something that it sounds so basic, but I see many founders struggling with interviews, and it's basically as well what you just mentioned before, Laurent. It's extremely difficult to have all those different hats on at the beginning, right? So you need to know about market research, about psychology, about sales, and you easily mix it up, right? But when you talk to customers at this stage, it's more about finding out about their struggles, finding out about their problems and needs, right? So it's more listening. It's actually not talking. It's really listening a lot to people reflecting your ICP or buyer persona. Then you have already feeling for the market, and that's actually where you can start, right?
It sounds a bit that often, or that's also what I see, is often we hear, we need to have a proper sales process in place, especially if you're a B2B startup. And then you just want to start selling, but you actually miss this very first important step that I think is called sort of customer development, where you actually want to test your assumptions and see, where should I actually build this sales process? Which ICP, which market is a good fit for what I have to offer and where I can actually solve a problem. So this customer development, with what you described as listening, understanding, and asking questions instead of just pitching your product or services, that's probably this very first crucial, important step, right?
Everything after, all the next steps are shaped by this ICP or your buyer persona. But when you talk about, like B2B, sometimes it's a bit more challenging because, some of the products are very niche, so you don't have a huge audience. don't have lots of data on the market. And that means as well, you need to work with the data you have, right? If you just have 3 test customers, then you need to, work with the feedback you gain from those 3 test customers, right?
And Laurent, you are in the market yourself. You're building every day, acquiring new customers. Can you give us a very specific example of what the ideal customer profile looks like from a Holy Code perspective?
Sure. I mean, there's different ones for the different services that we have, right? But let's say, for example, someone wants to build their proof of concept or their MVP really early on. So what is the right sort of customer for us? It's a co-founder of a company, specifically in the markets of Switzerland or Germany, German speaking, because that's currently where we are strongest. We also cover UK and US and other markets, but that's sort of where we're focused on because we also have people on the ground. They usually are not techie, because if they are techie, they'd like to hack away at it themselves, right? So they're rather, the co-founding CEO, COO, sales, whatever, and they may be missing this technological aspect. They've done a little bit of research on their market already, so they know also a little bit what they need, what's problem they want to solve with the solution. And then we can really sit down with them and say, okay, let's define the very small MVP version that we can deliver for you. But if they haven't done their research yet, that's really difficult, because then you don't know what to build exactly, and it's just going to cost them money, unfortunately. Or if they're too techy, they will do this part by themselves, and then they come into play at the later stage when they need to build a team or whatever, and then they become the next ICP, basically.
And I assume the sort of the validation part, asking the questions, etc., that's something that you cannot find on LinkedIn or in a CV. That's probably something that you then figure out in a first qualification call with these founders that seem to be a good fit, but then you decide, does it make sense to move forward with them or not?
Absolutely. So this is one thing we're working on a lot, is for these different ICPs to try and figure out earlier, before we get in touch with them, whether this is now the right phase. I usually say that if you have a tech problem, within 2 weeks, you've found your solution, right? And that's where we need to be present. So this is very difficult to find that exact spot. So it's a wild mix of trying to be more precise on defining those ICPs and really being there when it matters, but also having this brand awareness that people just have you top of mind to come to you with that specific issue. And that's why we're currently saying we're not the global number one partner for startups. We want to be this in the DACH area for the moment, so Germany, Switzerland, Austria, to be top of mind there, and then grow out of a position of strength into next markets. That's currently how we approach it.
You wanted to say not yet global, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it is the 5-year plan, but currently we're not there yet.
And you also built B2C businesses before you started Holy Code. So I wonder, does this vary in terms of B2C and B2B market approaches, the ICP discovery and the handling of the ICP?
I think it does, but I think it also really depends on the size of the customer that you're looking at, right? And that can be either in B2B or in B2C. So you're not going to have the same approach in terms of go-to-market when you're looking at people that will spend $10 to $100 per month on your platform, compared to if you have a client that is going to spend $1 million or more per year with you, right? So there are very different approaches based on that. So in the lower end, it's more product-led. So you're trying to get them onto your page via marketing. It has to be everything, click and test yourself, and then you basically subscribe to it at some point. And the bigger the ticket size get, the more you get into actually having a sales team that is either first just doing, phone sales or email sales, and then over time really on-site sales, and then local teams. So the bigger the ticket size is, the more you have to invest into actually converting that, and that completely changes the approach that you're taking. And that is, I think, relevant for B2C and B2B, obviously even a little bit more in B2B compared to B2C, but both sides have this, I would say.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And Boris, I wonder, when we start validating and really tackling the ICP discovery, how do you then go about when you say, hey, it doesn't work, it doesn't click, I just feel that this is not the right ICP. Should we just start looking for a different ICP, Or should we just say, okay, we have to pivot the product and build something completely else to actually serve the ICP that we just talked to? How do you make that decision?
I'm happy that you mentioned the product. I always tell the startups, don't build before you have clear evidence that there is a market. And I think, this is really kind of your homework before you kind of, like brief an agency or build it on your own. And that means, yes, you have an ICP or a buyer persona, which is an assumption, right? So it's a hypothesis at the beginning. So you start testing it, you run your interviews, and interviews are very powerful. So, I usually see that after 5 to 7 interviews with a ICP or a buyer persona, you have a strong feeling if that there is a need, right? If they have a problem big enough to solve. That's important, right? The problem needs to be big enough. So we have a lot of problems that we just deal with, right? That they're actually okay, but it needs to be big enough because they need to pay for it afterwards. And then you can still continue testing. You can create a value proposition, test it with the landing page when you have a huge, let's say, or a bigger audience. Doesn't matter if it's B2B or B2C, but you can already test it before you start building, right? So I think that gives you a certain view on the next steps, basically, and obviously it's kind of lowering the risk of spending a lot of money or lots of resources on something that is not going to work. Because when there's no market, you can build the greatest product ever, you won't sell it, right?
You will just use it yourself, and that's it.
Oh yeah, that's great. I mean, if you build it for yourself, you always have product market fit, right?
Well, in a mini spectrum, but that's what you try to figure out are the other people. Exactly. Yeah. Laurent, I wonder, when you were starting out with Holy Code, you had your ICP focus as well. How did it feel when you said, okay, now we really found the right ICP? Did you also iterate multiple times before you actually arrived at the right ICP for Holy Code or any other of the businesses that you started?
Actually, at Holy Code, I would say we were rather lucky that we started using the service for ourselves. We needed to build a software team for our own company, solving our own problem. And then there were just a lot of other startup founders in the same sort of range that came to us and said, hey, this is something we could also profit from. So it was relatively clear to us that this works because we solved it for ourselves and we found enough other people that also had that same issue. It was more complex than, and I think Boris mentioned that in the beginning, that you have to find your ICP again and again. And once the company grows and you add more products, once we defined after 6-7 years that besides the staffing, so building tech teams, we also want to build products for the clients directly or help them build ERPs, to really cover this whole tech journey, then it became much more difficult because suddenly we had to define at which point is which person our new ICP, how do we get to them? And that's been a lot of iterating and a lot of trying to find that. So in the ERP space, for example, today we know really well what our ICP is and it works. And it's just sort of a machinery that we know, okay, this amount of leads, this amount of opportunities every month, and we can only handle that much because we cannot grow as fast. So that's fantastic. Yeah, almost. I would like to scale much faster, but it's really difficult to find fantastic employees in that area. And then we have other areas such as the early stage where, as we discussed before, it's still a struggle for us to figure out the ICP in a structured way. Once we talk to them, we know, but it takes a lot of time to get there, right? And that's something, I think that work never ends. So you have your ICP and 2 years later, your product needs to change, it needs to shift, and you need to reanalyze it. Yeah. But usually once you've found your ICP, I think the things that you feel is suddenly the talks you have are starting to go a bit easier because it's like you're speaking the same language, the questions they ask and the answers you give, they just match more because you really have a problem solution fit and the conversion rates start picking up. You see that you're doing less calls, but you have more outcome out of it. If these sort of things line up, the feeling, the matching, and then also the conversions, you're getting really close or you're closer to your ICP than you were a couple of weeks back.
I was really curious about this feeling. So it sounds a bit like love at first sight. When you really hit it, you know it, you feel it, that it's a good fit. Is that how it felt when you hit the ideal ICP?
Well, sometimes, yes. There's also, the cultural aspects. Some people are just ICP because you also love to work with them. So they're a bit more ICP maybe. And then there are people that are your ICP, but maybe the collaboration is good, but it's not like you're culturally super well aligned, but it's still an ICP. So I think you also have to distinguish between those two. So as long as the hard facts speak for it, conversion rates, it works, you're moving faster through the cycles, you hit your ICP, but then there's always this love aspect that I'm trying to look for in clients. That's what I love, to work with people that are really on the same value set.
That's wonderful. And Boris, now we described a bit about the feeling, how it feels when you find the right ICP. What about the metrics? What are some key metrics to really say, hey, we hit this, this, and this. This is really a strong indicator, or maybe even proof of product market fit. What does your experience say there?
And it's actually a hard one because there are a lot of great KPIs when you scale, like lifetime value, for example, is a great example, right? How should you measure lifetime value when you just start? Like how would you know how long a customer stays with you? You don't even know your prices at the beginning, right? So this is really hard to measure those kind of classical scaling KPIs or customer acquisition costs. At the beginning, it's really just testing out different channels, see where you get a lot of traction, right? So it's not about the cost; it's really about testing, right? And obviously, you don't scale yet, so your prices will change over time as well. So there is no kind of like you just get a first feeling what works, but not. But it's not a great KPI to use. So what I usually use, and as well, there must be a certain audience to use those kind of tools. I usually use the Sean Ellis test or product market fit survey, which asks your users or customers how disappointed would you be if you could no longer use this product, and then they can answer 3 different questions. One is wouldn't be disappointed at all, I would be slightly disappointed, I would be very disappointed, right? And you want to have as much very disappointed as possible. There's, I don't know if there's scientific evidence, but there's a lot of experience, and what they say, it's about 40% you need to reach of very disappointed people to reach product market fit. I don't believe in this number, but I think it's a good indicator. So you see if how you develop actually over time, right? And I would even suggest to use the Sean Ellis test after reaching product market fit, because it's a great indicator if you're on the right track. And then if you need to have a certain audience. If you're able to measure retention, that's good as well, insight into product market fit. So usually product market fit means when your retention curve is flattening, right? So you can even increase it slightly, right? So that's basically the 2, I would say, easier to use tools. And then obviously if you work with just test customers, right, it's probably the time when you manage to make them into real customers, right? Then you see, okay, there's a willingness to pay. And that's as well a good insight if you've reached it now or not.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Boris.
This episode was sponsored by Property, the leading real estate platform for all real estate transactions with a comprehensive ecosystem. They combine highly trained experts with the latest technologies on an intelligent platform to provide clients, brokers, and service partners with risk-free, flexible, and simplified services. Learn more at property.com/ch. That's property with an i.com/ch.
And Laurent, something I often also hear is that, you really have proven, especially from a VC perspective, that you reach product market fit is when you have 1 million or more in recurring revenue. But what do you think about that? Is that also a good metric to consider on top of Boris just shared, or is there anything else that you would like to add from a metric perspective?
I was just laughing because I was sure you're going to say, once you said VC, I was sure you're going to say 1 million in ARR, because that's really, I don't know how, but this is the metric that everybody brings up all the time, right? I think you can see much earlier whether you're able to have product market fit, right? I think the aspect that VCs are looking for is scale, because product market fit doesn't need 1 million ARR to be hit. But what 1 million ARR shows them is that this niche is big enough in terms of scaling, that it's worth them investing the money, right? So that's basically, I think it's a step after product market fit. I mean, it's not either or, but if we would go that way, then 1 million ARR is probably a step after product market fit, showing that it's scalable. The product market fit, you can hit that at 100,000 or 500,000 ARR per year. That's not really necessarily the thing, but I completely agree with Boris. So we also measured the product market fit survey score from Sean Ellis at Holy Code even last year, after 9 years of running. We were at 44 or 46%. I don't remember exactly. So slightly above what they say you need to have a product market fit, but the company's been working well for 9 years. So yeah, I would also not say this 40% is really the key indicator, but I think it's the trend. Are you going in the right direction? Are you able to, keep pleasing more of your customers than you did the last time you did this measurement? And the other part is obviously the churn rate. So the more your churn flattens, or if you're even able to increase the curve at some point again by adding more revenue to them or whatever, you're definitely doing a fantastic job. And then it's very client specific, right? You should measure a lot of different areas as well. So at mobile as a marketplace, where we did not have this high recurrency, customer acquisition costs to customer lifetime value was a super important metric for us, because we knew every client that comes to us, we will have one transaction in the next 3 to 4 years on average. So this needs to generate at least 3 times the amount of money that you're investing into getting this client onto your platform. And then, also on that, there's interesting areas. Someone once told me that if the customer lifetime value to the customer acquisition costs is higher than 5 to 1, you're not investing enough into your scaling. If it's below 3 to 1, you don't have product market fit. So it's a bit arbitrary, but I do think that is also true. And there's a lot of these metrics that you can look into. But I think those 3, product market fit survey from Sean Ellis, retention rate, and then customer acquisition to customer lifetime values. If you can measure these 3, if you're already at that point as a company, I think you have a very good grasp on what's possible.
Just one thing that is sometimes really helpful is like, once you have this data, right? Once you understand, what's your retention, what's your product market fit score, start understanding who answered it how, right? So start segmenting your users or your customers, and then you probably see, in a certain segment that have much higher score, those are much lower, and that gives you insights again on your ICP or your buyer persona. So it never stops. Like, you always learn about them and you always shape them further.
That's fantastic. I was also wondering, you both mentioned the Sean Ellis test. What role does the Net Promoter Score play? Is that sort of something when you're more scaling up and maturing where the NPS comes in, or would it even be sort of an addition or even a replacement of the Sean Ellis test?
I think it works in the same way, sort of, right? The Net Promoter Score is more on a scale from 0 to 10. So I think it's a bit arbitrarily, in the sense that it only takes, 9s and 10s as your promoters, and everything below 6 are demoters. So there's a bit of a cutoff that I think is arbitrarily chosen. So it will only tell you who is really, really, really in love with your product, and it will tell you who's definitely not in love with your product. But everything in the middle is like, if they would take 8 as a Net Promoter as well, your score would look drastically different. And that's what I don't like about the Net Promoter Score, even though we use it internally all the time. But this 8-9 differentiation, then also different cultures maybe look at this differently. I think it creates separation that is not necessarily needed. And I think that's what the Sean Ellis product market fit survey does much better, by the way that he gives you the response possibilities. You're either super happy, you're somewhat disappointed, or you're very disappointed if you cannot, use this product anymore. And I think that's why it gives you a more tailored answer. The Net Promoter Score is still great, and we use it, and it's very good to benchmark yourselves against other companies out there, because it's a number that will benchmark you relatively easy. But I think PMF is just a bit more qualitative than the NPS, in my opinion. I don't know, Boris, how you see that.
Well, I think you need just a much bigger sample for NPS, and usually don't have that. Right. So Sean Ellis is really developed for startups and for smaller samples, and it gives you very good kind of feelings. It's not, I wouldn't call it market research in a way. It's really to give you a feel, or you're on the right track.
Absolutely. Yeah. I also think that the NPS is very powerful, but as Laurent said, there are cultural differences. So we heard sometimes from German clients that said, oh, we would never give a 10 or a 9. That just never happens. It's never perfect. There's always something to improve. And then you just have to consider these votings to better understand where they come from, to not have a lower rating than you might actually have. I think that's a very good point that you made there, Laurent. I also wonder, once you have everything coming together, you have ICP figured out, then you also want to probably start to scale up and really build the machine. So in that regard, and I start with you, Laurent, then Boris can add, you also want to make sure that your company vision and maybe even OKRs that you set are all coming together to a well-oiled machine, not only in the sales part, but the whole company. How does all of that play together? And when do you really know it's time to start investing in scaling things?
I think that's a very difficult task to do well as a company because it all influences each other, right? So any learning you do, and I think Boris said that, any learning you do on surveys and interviews, etc., that influences your ICP obviously influences also the OKRs that you're setting yourself for the next quarter or the next year afterwards. And if that continues for 1 or 2 or 3 years, this will have an impact on the vision that you have as a company. Once you realize you've been going after, a different set of customers or trying to solve a problem that actually is not your problem anymore. But I think the vision is obviously the most long-term one, the one you set as a founder or as a founding team in the beginning. And out of that, you get to your OKRs, and out of that, basically, you learn on your ICP what you need to do to get there. So this all has to be quite well aligned and in sync so that you can do it. And then the scaling question, that's really interesting in the sense that even today, I think we still mess it up sometimes. So for just to take an example from Holy Code, to be specific, last year we hired 2 sales employees in Switzerland and Germany because we thought this is the time when we need to go away from founder-led sales towards really a team of sales that can get to other people and a different network. And we were consciously thinking, do we need more marketing to create these leads first? Or do we need sales that can help us convert and really, accompany the client through the process? And we said we need the sales part. So we started, and within 3 months, it was obvious that this was the wrong choice, that we first need to be able to deliver a pipeline of good potential clients. So we would actually need the marketing first, especially in Germany, where we were not as known as we maybe are in Switzerland. So we had to take a step back and say, no, we need to turn this around, hire a growth marketing team, start with top of funnel, get that filled up, and then basically out of that, do the other steps. And even then, we're not ready to scale yet because we first need to prove that we have our ICP in these funnels, and we're not just doing meetings that are for the sake of it, but really tailored meetings. And once we saw that these conversions rates start picking up, and we've, as I said before, we started having a good feeling in the conversations, that was the time when we said, okay, and now let's try this channel and let's try this channel and put a bit of money into that as well and start scaling a little bit more. But we're still not at scale. We're still on the way to get there currently.
I love this very practical experience that you share here, because I think it's so valuable. We often think, oh, I just have to hit product market fit, then I can scale and it will be a walk in the park. But it's not the case. It's what Boris described before. To find product market fit, you always have to iterate, to learn. It's a never-ending process. And I assume so is scaling, as you just described. You make mistakes, you adapt, you learn, hopefully, and then you find a way that hopefully works the next time.
Absolutely. And it's a sort of, someone told me that once, and I think it's really true. Getting a company to scale successfully is a set of S-curves after each other, right? So you start at nothing, you hit product market fit, you find your ICP, and you start scaling well until your niche is, you've covered your whole niche, or the market has moved on and you've messed and forgotten how to move on yourself, or you should have brought a new product and your growth flattens and you need to iterate and innovate again. So the really successful companies are either the ones that only needed to go through one of these S-curves because their market just became incredibly big and they were the masters of scale, or, and I think that's the more likely case, you have to go through a couple of these S-curves where you need to innovate and redefine your ICP and your product market fit and introduce new products and find new niches to keep growing. And if you do that 3 to 5 times, I think you will be a very successful company at some point.
I really like your sales example because it's such a typical mistakes we all do, and I probably went through that 2 or 3 times, because like sales becomes so clear if you're a founder. You understand it in depth, right? And you think it's easy, like you can teach everybody now, or anybody to just run it like you do. But what you usually don't understand as a founder is that you just have much more information. You can make decisions as well, right? You can change the product when you talk to a customer, and if you have resources or not, right, to react to that. So it's a total different role. Usually founders then start too early to like hire a sales team and even scale the sales team. So I had to get to let go once a team of 5 people, because it just didn't work out well, right? And this is bad, right? So this hurts them and me as well, right? So it was a really bad mistake.
I also want to talk about go-to-market strategies, because we talked about finding your ICP, validating that, and then building your way up to product market fit. Along that, either already slightly before you hit product market fit, or at least then after you really hit it, then you need a very solid and really good go-to-market strategy. So what role does this play, this whole go-to-market strategy, in doing our homework on product market fit, but also to prepare for scaling beyond that, Boris?
Well, your ICP, or knowing your customer in depth, shapes your go-to-market strategy. So all the experiments you do along the way to get there, all those experiments give you certain insights on what your growth channels are, on your geographical markets, on how to talk to your customer, right? So your value proposition shapes that, how to talk, how to trigger your customers, how to convert them. And this is basically your go-to-market strategy is just a result of all those insights you gain throughout this whole process.
I love that. Everything plays together. And I turn to you again, Laurent, to see how does that look like today at Holy Code? What is your go-to-market strategy? You mentioned sales, you mentioned marketing. Tell us a bit more about your go-to-market strategy today.
Yeah, it's relatively complicated since we have several companies now that we have different ICP groups that we need to go to. So I cannot go through all of them, but let's just pick one in, let's say, everyone that comes to the software agency. So for the software agency, we have 2 ICPs. We have, as I said before, there's very early stage founders that want to build the first solution. Maybe it's even built on no code like Bubble that we should build for them. And then we have the second segment where they already have a working prototype. And now it's starting to be difficult to get the scale out of it. And they need to rebuild it or improve it together with a partner that has done this a couple of times. So these are sort of the times during a company where in the software agency business, they would come to us. And so far, what we try to do is, because it's really difficult to define where those people are when they have that need, is to be present at all the touch points they might go to look for inspiration during those points, right? So a lot of webinars, a lot of physical startup events, a lot of coaching and exchange platforms that they could go to, trying to also create a lot of blog know-how that they might stumble across when they Google something digitally, trying to have a good LinkedIn presence where we believe they're more active usually. And trying to connect to founders that might be at that point later on. So for us, it's a relatively untargeted approach in the sense of doing this long term so that they have us top of mind once they are there. So probably not the best example for a proper go-to-market ICP, because we haven't perfectly found our ICP or the go-to-market to those ICPs yet. We're still working on how to get to them in the right place, right?
But a very realistic overview about how you operate and run your company today. And I think also a closer check to reality than just something from a book that says everything is perfect if you just do this and that. It's often gray, not black and white out there.
Yeah, and that would be awesome, right? Just to give a different example, for the Movu platform 5, 6, 7 years ago, actually, sorry, now it's more, it's 10 years ago, it was really just Google Ads. Because if someone wanted to move his home, they would go to Google and say, relocation company, Basel to Zurich or Berlin to Frankfurt or whatever it was, right? So it was very easy to find the your ICP, the people that wanted to move with you, right? So in different cases, sometimes it's very easy, but then scaling out of that one go-to-market approach to others that maybe are less costly can be very difficult. That was the case at Movo in the beginning. Whereas at Holy Code, there's a lot of different ways you can get to them. It's just not that easy to target the one that is going to scale the easiest. So these are probably two ends of the scale to look at.
Absolutely. And to wrap up things today, I also want to look back to your favorite mistakes that both of you made along the ICP journey. Let's start with you, Boris. If you had to pick just one mistake, what was your favorite one that you made along the ICP discovery or ICP building?
I would say the favorite one I already mentioned was, or it's not a favorite one. It was like the biggest one probably was like scaling too fast, and especially in sales. So that's, I would say, something that happens to most of us. It's just very natural. Another thing that I would like to mention quickly is like not understanding that your assumptions are just hypotheses, right? It's not the truth. It's not that your product vision is there, and it's okay, right? But it will become different, right? So just to have this understanding, probably that I lacked as well in that, and I learned during my time, especially at CodeCheck, to run interviews, to run experiments before implementing something, right? So we really did a lot of like design sprints and so forth. We try to keep the resources as small as possible, and then to execute once you know that you're on the right track. And I guess that was something I liked over many years, and realized that probably a bit too late for certain things.
Thank you for sharing that. Laurent, of course, also over to you. Your favorite mistakes or mistake?
Very similar to Boris. At one point at Movo, I think when we started hitting the end of this S-curve in our niche, we said, okay, now let's go into different markets, painting, renovation work, etc. Because there's platform out there that do that, just not on a very good level yet. So we've done it for moving. We can also do that. That was our assumption, our hypothesis. And we believed that to be the truth. So we hired a 10-people team, started working on it, and then figured out 6 months in, well, this market is much more difficult than what we thought. And we need to go back to step one, and had to let go of the whole team and really start with very little resources doing those learnings, those interviews again, to come to a solution that could work long term. So exactly the same thing. Probably in our case, out of optimism and a certain belief that we're very good at what we're doing now because we've covered one market, not really doing your homework on the go-to-market and the product market fit in the next segment, and just believing copying someone will be it. That was very stupid in hindsight.
You need to be optimist to be a founder, right? And that sometimes harms exactly, to see, to have a realistic view on things. So I always like to have, I wouldn't say the pessimist, but some more with the realistic view in the team to kind of like give feedback as well on certain things.
How you call them, advocatus diaboli or something like that, right?
CFOs.
CFOs. I love that. And I think what really is also a key message that both of you sort of shared here, and I think is very valuable and helpful, is that there is no shortcut to the ICP part. You really have to do your homework, the things we talked about with you today, to get there. Otherwise, it will probably come and bite you back if you don't do your proper homework and put in the work there to really thoroughly discover where you have a fit and where not. So to wrap up the conversation today, I also want to run some spontaneous rapid fire questions with you. I'm going to start with you, Boris, and then one by one. If you had to choose only one, focus on a niche market or target a broader audience?
Niche.
For you, Laurent, focus on customer acquisition or customer retention? I know it's so mean.
Retention. In the long term, retention always wins.
Perfect. And prioritize product features or user experience, Boris?
User experience.
Easy. Laurent, early stage funding from VCs or better bootstrapping?
I've seen both sides. Currently, I'm more on the bootstrapping side.
Got it. I think this is more of an upcoming trend now as funding gets more tough as well. For you, Boris, hire for cultural fit or for technical skills?
Cultural fit. It's definitely more important. People can learn.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And Laurent, this is interesting because you have a very broad offering. Focus on a single product or diversify offerings.
The thing that I think about every day in my life. I assume it's better to focus on one thing early on and then later on try to build a portfolio that is diversified. And I think at Holy Code, we are just at the latest stage where you can diversify already. But it's a struggle still. Yeah.
It is. Thank you both so much for being here today. And this was actually a kickoff that we did with Laurent, and we will host multiple webinars / live streams once a month, basically. The next one is already coming up at the end of June, on June 25th, where we're going to talk about 1 million plus ARR, great, but what now? We're going to talk again to Laurent and, of course, to Lars Mangelsdorf from Yokoi. So that's also going to be the next fun webinar to tune into. Boris, thank you so much for being here today. Laurent and the whole Holy Code team, thank you for putting this together with us here at Swisspreneur. It was a pleasure and hope to see you again very soon as repeating guests.
Thank you so much, Silvan.
Thanks for having us.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.